Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into a topic that's, well, really fascinating, maybe even a bit uncomfortable for some. We're asking this core question: how does the way our society values things, the constant chase for material stuff, actually affect something really fundamental, our ability to love? And for this deep dive, we're drawing on some really powerful sources you've brought together to help us unpack this whole complex relationship.
Yeah, and maybe a good place to start to kind of set the foundation is with a quote from Sharon Salzberg. She says, "The fading away of greed and hatred is the foundation for liberation. Liberation is the sure heart's release, an understanding of the truth so powerful that there is no turning back from it." So our mission really is to explore how our modern culture, how its values challenge that very fading away of greed and what that means for love, for connection.
Okay, so let's dig into that. This idea of a me culture.
Yeah.
This focus on the individual leading to isolation. How does materialism specifically feed into that feeling, that, being cut off?
Well, the sources are pretty direct about this. They argue that materialism really fosters narcissism. It helps create a world where, and this is a quote, "things matter more than people."
Wow.
Yeah, and that inevitably leads to alienation, to loneliness. It's even flagged as a central cause of depression and despair. But what's really interesting is how this me culture isn't just random. It's tied, the sources suggest, to a historical failure. A failure to really live up to the democratic vision laid out in things like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights.
So when that bigger vision falters, domination kind of takes over and greed follows. Is that the idea?
That's essentially it. When democracy weakens and an ethic of domination strengthens, greed and exploitation tend to become, well, normalized.
Okay, so this feeling isn't just personal then. It's actually rooted in shifts in our nation's history. That's quite a connection. Can you elaborate a bit on how that vision started to falter? What were the triggers?
Absolutely. Various wars played a big role, weakening that hope in human rights and democracy. Vietnam is mentioned specifically. Before that time, you had these really powerful movements, civil rights, feminism, sexual liberation, that were all about a hopeful vision, justice, love, sharing resources.
Right, there was a lot of optimism then.
Exactly. But by the late 70s, after many of these radical movements didn't achieve their full aims, didn't reshape society in that democratic, peaceful way, well, the sources say folks stopped talking about love. And that sense of despair was just made deeper by the assassinations of key leaders who championed those very ideals: peace, justice, love.
Okay, so with that national picture looking pretty bleak, that breakdown of ideals,
Yeah.
it makes sense people would feel lost. Where did they turn? Did they look inward?
They did. Psychologically, there was this profound despair. Even if the economy was okay sometimes, people turned away from the public sphere, from seeking justice there. They looked to their private lives, family, relationships, hoping for solace, for connection.
And what did they find? Was it the answer?
Well, often not. They ran smack into what the sources call rampant lovelessness, especially within the traditional home, the male-dominated family structure that was supposed to be a haven.
So the refuge wasn't really a refuge.
Right. It led to this widespread feeling of cultural brokenheartedness. You saw divorce rates climbing, and suddenly everyone was much more aware of domestic violence, child abuse. It became clear that the traditional patriarchal family just couldn't offer that sanctuary people were searching for.
So if those traditional places like the family weren't providing comfort, what filled the gap? Where did people put their energy instead?
Facing that kind of emotional chaos, many people seem to just embrace a different kind of ethic, almost like a new version of the Protestant work ethic. Success started being measured almost purely by money, how much you earned, what you could buy.
The definition of the good life shifted.
Completely. From community and connection towards accumulation, towards a more hedonistic, materialistic kind of desire. And think about who became the icons. Rich celebrities, movie stars. They sort of replaced those visionary political or social leaders.
Right. So success became personal wealth, not, say, contributing to the community.
Yeah.
How did that affect ethics? Like in business?
Yeah.
And what about institutions? Did government or even religion play a role?
Well, it meant making money, pretty much by whatever means. That became the main goal. The ethical side of work often got pushed aside, and this acceptance of corruption, especially among the privileged, it became more widespread. Sometimes it was even justified, by officials linking big business support to national security or global power.
Interesting justification.
Yeah. And it happened right around the time that institutionalized religion seemed to lose some of its moral authority, or at least its focus shifted. The sources point out that some churches, some temples, actually started supporting this materialistic ethic too, maybe through things like prosperity gospels, focusing on individual success over, say, collective well-being.
That's quite a shift. So what about people in poorer communities, those without the same access to, conventional ways of making money? How did this worship of money show up there?
It showed up very starkly, actually. One major example is the huge increase in the street drug industry. For some individuals in poor communities, this was, ironically, one of the few areas where capitalism seemed to work well, at least for them. Quick money, sometimes large sums.
Right, a different path to the same goal.
Exactly. It let people in poverty chase the same material desires as the rich, just with different things. There's this really poignant example in the material about a mother. She's living in poverty, taught her kids right from wrong. But eventually, she accepts her child selling drugs because it brings money in. Money for necessities, but also for extras. Her own ethical values just get eroded by that intense longing and lack, as the source puts it.
Wow, that's powerful. It really suggests a universal drive then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's the common thread here between rich and poor in this chase for stuff?
The common thread, is that the feeling of satisfaction from getting something, from possessing it, is basically the same, rich or poor. And it was characterized by this unending, greedy pursuit. Just never enough. One source sums it up really bluntly. Greed was the order of the day. It just mirrored the bigger capitalist culture where a few people did really well, but most people were left with these endless, unsatisfied cravings. That core drive for more.
All right.
It became this universal, insatiable hunger.
So it sounds like that endless craving, that constant chase, it can actually become an addiction itself. You mentioned a psychotic lust earlier.
Absolutely. That's a key connection made in the sources. Widespread addiction, alcohol, drugs, sex, even shopping in all kinds of communities, rich and poor. It's deeply tied to what the research calls our psychotic lust for material consumption.
It's not just wanting things then.
No, it's more like an obsessive, almost destructive drive for more. Like any addiction, consumerism encourages this focus on wants and needs, feeding that state of endless craving. And Stanton Peele, in Love and Addiction, makes this crucial point. Addiction is not about relatedness. It fundamentally gets in the way of love because the drug, whatever form it takes, becomes the sacred thing. Intimacy gets destroyed in that greedy search for satisfaction, which, by its nature, can never actually be fully satisfied.
That link between addiction and the failure of relationships is stark. Is there a public example that kind of illustrates this?
Well, the sources bring up the O.J. Simpson case. When that was all over the news, there wasn't actually much talk about how substance abuse might have fueled the breakdown in that family.
Right, the focus was more on the violence itself.
Exactly. Domestic violence was highlighted, but the role of substance abuse and, poisoning the well for any positive emotional connection wasn't really discussed as a major factor. And the sources suggest, for example, that Nicole Simpson might have stayed in that dangerous situation partly because she didn't want to give up the superficially glamorous lifestyle.
So the material side trapped her.
It can be a trap, yeah.
Yeah.
It shows how people, men and women, both sometimes stay in really dysfunctional, even loveless situations because it's materially opportune, as the text says. A sobering thought about what we prioritize.
It really highlights the danger. Does this kind of thinking, prioritizing gain over well-being, extend beyond these high-profile or illegal situations into everyday life?
Oh, absolutely. Greed motivates people all across society to put themselves in risky spots. I mean, prisons are full of people whose crimes were driven by that lust for money. And while we're encouraged to see them as, outliers, studies show many people admit they'd lie for money. And think about gambling lotteries, casinos. The public support for it shows how addictive that desire for money is. You see working class, middle class people gambling away their incomes, sometimes lying to family, cheating them even, to keep the habit going. It ruins trust, ruins care, even if they never get arrested.
So how does this need for instant gratification, which seems core to greed, affect how we even think about love? Are we starting to want love like a quick fix, too?
That's a really crucial point the sources make. This same politics of greed, this systemic focus on self-interest and getting stuff, influences how people approach love. They often want fulfillment immediately. They want love to act like a drug, basically, give them a steady state of bliss or security instantly.
But that's not how love works, is it?
Not real love, no. John Welwood puts it well in Journey of the Heart. He says, dreaming that love will save us, only keeps us stuck in wishful fantasy, undermining the real power of the love, which is to transform us. And there's a note that in patriarchal culture, men are often, quote, especially inclined to see love as something they should receive without expending effort.
Yeah.
So when real love comes along and it invites, critical self-awareness, maybe even pain, a lot of people just turn away.
Because it's not easy or instantly gratifying.
Exactly. And what's worrying is how society seems to normalize dysfunctional relationships. All the focus on them can make people think, oh, all families are messed up, or that it's actually abnormal to believe that one can have a functional, loving family.
That's a pretty cynical outcome.
It is, and it's seen as a direct result of living in a culture where this politics of greed is just the norm. It trains us to expect easy fixes, even in our deepest relationships.
So it almost sounds like we're encouraged to treat people like disposable objects, like consumer goods.
That's exactly the analogy used. When greedy consumption is the norm, dehumanization becomes okay, almost necessary. People get treated like Dixie cups. You use them, and if they don't satisfy your individual desires right away, you just discard them.
Wow.
And obviously that prevents real commitment, lasting friendships, loving communities. They can't form or survive in that environment. Think about advertising, mass media. Even before a movie starts, you're bombarded with images promoting greed, consumerism. Often it shows people consuming with others, but it's not about real connection.
It's about shared buying, not shared spirit.
Precisely. Shared acquisition, not shared spirit.
That's a powerful and, frankly, disturbing image.
Yeah.
What's the wider cost to society when greed becomes the driving force like this?
Well, there's a reason greed is traditionally called a deadly sin, right? It fundamentally eats away at the moral values that encourage us to care about the common good. It breaks down that sense of connectedness, of community that's actually essential for us to survive. It replaces it with this harmful self-centeredness.
It turns healthy self-love into something else.
Into pathological narcissism, yeah, where only the self matters, and any action is justified if it satisfies your desires. That willingness to sacrifice for others, which is always part of love, greed just annihilates it. The sources go pretty far with this, suggesting it helps explain why a nation might deprive its own poor citizens of basic services while funding, say, a culture of violent imperialism.
Yeah.
Prioritizing self-interest at home translates outward.
That's a strong claim.
It is, and there's also this irony, right? Generosity, charity, they sometimes get viewed as suspect or maybe a gesture of the weak. So you end up with less charitable citizens who then arrogantly defend self-serving policies.
And the irony you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Marianne Williamson points this out in The Healing of America. She says, greed is considered legitimate now, while brotherly love is not. Which is especially ironic when you hear people who inherited their wealth being the loudest voices insisting that the poor and working classes just need to work harder for their resources.
Okay, this paints a pretty grim picture overall. Is there any way out? Can individuals or society push back against this powerful tide of greed and reclaim, love and connection?
There is hope, definitely, but it takes conscious effort. It's not automatic. One source shares this surprising insight from an interview with the rap artist Lil' Kim. She'd gained all this material wealth, but she had basically no hope for love. She thought the money would somehow make up for the emotional lack.
But it doesn't work that way.
Right. It just reinforces that truth we all kind of know, the one the Beatles sang about, money can't buy me love. The wealthy are often just as stressed, just as dissatisfied. And Richard Foster, in Freedom of Simplicity, talks about how greed leads to personal misery debt, constantly moving for better jobs. But crucially, he says, it crowds out much interest in civil rights or inner city poverty or the starved masses of India. Greed has a way of severing the cords of compassion.
That severing of compassion seems key. We've seen how society shifted. But what about those who actively fought against it, like the 60s radicals you mentioned? Even they seem to fall into materialism later. What happened? Why didn't free love stick?
Well, the free love idea, it thrived in what the sources call utopian communal enclaves. These experimental, maybe idealized communities. It was easier for young people without many responsibilities.
Okay.
But it didn't really take root in the day-to-day lives of ordinary working people or older people. Those young progressives who found it easy to be radical on the edge, they kind of fell into despair when they hit the reality, the hard work of changing and reorganizing the whole system.
The practicality's gotten away.
Yeah. Many ended up choosing material comfort over fighting for justice. They feared lacking things or maybe being forced to share resources, especially once they had kids. So a lot of these reformed radicals became, social liberals and fiscal conservatives. They might support big business, but also want to end welfare.
Which connects back to that Williamson quote.
Exactly. She argues that the backlash against welfare isn't really about budgets, it's a backlash against compassion in the public sphere. It taps into this widespread fear people have. Embracing an ethics of compassion feels like it threatens their security.
So they just try to accumulate more.
Right. They pile up more and more stuff, but they still feel insecure because, as the sources say, there is always someone who has accumulated more. It's just an endless, unfulfilling cycle.
So fundamentally, what's the choice we're facing here as individuals, as a society? What's the real alternative to this politics of greed?
The sources point to a very public example, the president and the young government employee selling her story. That whole situation is presented as a kind of public drama showing the politics of greed in action. It destroyed love because things like hedonistic pleasure, fame, money, they were prioritized over honesty, over care, over betrayal's impact. Clearly, as the source says, not a love story.
So the alternative path is?
The alternative path offered is this. Living simply is the primary way everyone can resist greed every day.
Living simply.
Yeah, and the argument is that it directly helps us love better. It's not just about having less stuff, but about concrete actions. Things like working to change public policy, electing leaders who are actually honest and progressive, maybe turning off the TV more, showing respect for love itself, stopping wasteful habits, recycling, supporting communal ways of living, interdependence, valuing the ability to delay gratification, and just taking responsibility for our own actions.
We've covered a lot of ground here, really digging into how this pervasive politics of greed seems to have shaped so much of our society. Our relationships, our institutions, often pushing aside our ability to love and connect. It's definitely a powerful reminder about what we choose to prioritize, isn't it? Both individually and, as a whole society. And how those choices really ripple outwards.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought, something provocative for you to chew on from the sources. When we value the delaying of gratification and take responsibility for our actions, we simplify our emotional universe. Living simply makes loving simple. Making that choice, living simply, isn't just about your own life. It's framed as a daily affirmation, a way of connecting to a wider world community, and ultimately, a path towards a more genuinely loving way of being.